The alien scanner hummed with deadly precision as it swept across the human vessel, floating in the void. Commander Zethkri of the hegemony dreadnought, Vexthalan, watched the readings cascade across his neural interface, each data point confirming what every civilized species in the galaxy already knew. Humans were primitive, violent, and utterly beneath notice. "Analysis complete, Commander," his science officer Veltar announced, her voice carrying the cold satisfaction of absolute certainty, confirming initial assessment. Crude iron composite hull, primitive fusion drives, laughably inefficient energy distribution systems. Zethkri's mandibles clicked in amusement. The human ship, they called it Terran Dawn, hung motionless against the starfield, no larger than a hegemony patrol craft. Its boxy angular design spoke of a species that had barely crawled from their gravity well. No elegant curves, no quantum fold architecture. Just ugly functional metal welded together by creatures who still thought in 3 dimensions. "Weapons analysis?" Zethkri asked, though he already knew the answer. "Kinetic projectile systems, chemical explosives, nothing that could penetrate. Our shields, even if they fired continuously for a standard cycle." Veltar's tone carried the contempt of a species that had mastered quantum warfare before humans had discovered fire. "Shall I prepare the disintegration beam?" But something nagged at Zethkri. In his 3 centuries of service to the hegemony, he had personally overseen the subjugation of 47 species. Each time, the pattern was the same: scan, analyze, categorize threat level, eliminate or enslave. Simple, efficient, final. So, why did this feel different? "Commander," his communications officer Nixval interrupted. "We're receiving a transmission from the human vessel." "Audio only?" "Negative, sir. Full sensory broadcast on all frequencies. They're trying to communicate in 17 different languages simultaneously." Zethkri paused. Most species, when faced with a hegemony dreadnought, either fled in terror or fired desperately. They didn't try to talk, patch it through. The bridge filled with a cacophony of human voices, some harsh and guttural, others melodic and flowing. Through his universal translator, the message came through in fragments: peaceful intentions, seek dialogue, representatives of Terra, wish to establish a cultural exchange, mutual benefit. "They want to negotiate," Nixval said, his voice carrying surprised amusement. "A species that hasn't even achieved faster than light travel wants to negotiate with the hegemony." The bridge crew erupted in clicking laughter. The hegemony controlled 3/4 of the galaxy. Their technology was so advanced that most species worshipped them as gods, and these humans, these barely evolved primates, wanted to talk as equals. "Shall I respond, Commander?" Nixval asked. Zethkri considered. Standard protocol demanded immediate destruction of any species that might pose a future threat. But humans? With their primitive technology and isolated position on the galaxy's outer rim, they were less threatening than the microorganisms that occasionally clung to his ship's hull. "Open a channel," he decided. "Let's hear what these creatures have to say before we vaporize them." The main view screen flickered to life, revealing the bridge of the human vessel. Zethkri had to suppress a derisive click. The humans had arranged themselves in what they clearly thought was an impressive display. 5 individuals in matching uniforms, standing in rigid formation. The one in front, wearing additional insignia that presumably indicated rank, stepped forward. "I am Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran exploration vessel, Dawn. On behalf of humanity and the United Earth Coalition, I greet you in peace." Zethkri activated his image projector, allowing his massive form to dominate their pathetic little bridge. At 4 meters tall, with razor-sharp chitin and eyes like burning coals, he had the satisfaction of seeing several humans step backward involuntarily. "I am Commander Zethkri of the Hegemony 4th Fleet. Your presence in this sector is illegal. You will surrender your vessel and prepare for processing." But the human captain didn't cower. Instead, she straightened, meeting his gaze with an intensity that was unexpected. "Commander, we come in peace. We seek only knowledge and friendship. Surely two advanced civilizations can find common ground. Advanced? Zethkri's laughter was like grinding stone. Your species has barely mastered nuclear fission. Your ship is held together with metal welds. You call this advanced? We call it human, Captain Chen replied quietly. Something in her tone made Zethkri pause. There was no fear, no desperation, just certainty, as if she knew something he didn't. Veltar, he said, not taking his eyes off the human captain. Run a deep scan. I want to know everything about their ship. Every rivet, every circuit, every molecule. Already in progress, Commander. Scanning now at maximum resolution. Veltar's voice trailed off. The clicking and humming of the scanner continued, but something had changed. The science officer's posture had gone rigid. Veltar? Commander, I'm reading some unusual energy signatures. The human vessel appears to have some sort of containment field. Very subtle, almost hidden. Containment field for what? Scanning deeper. Commander, there's something inside that ship, something big. On the view screen, Captain Chen smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Commander Zethkri, she said, her voice carrying across the void with perfect clarity. I should mention, the Dawn isn't just an exploration vessel. It's also our first diplomatic ship. We wanted to make a good impression when we met our galactic neighbors. What are you saying, human? I'm saying we brought a gift. Zethkri felt the first cold touch of uncertainty. What kind of gift? Captain Chen's smile widened. The kind that explains why Earth sent just one ship to make contact with the entire hegemony. Veltar, report. But his science officer was staring at her readings in horror. Commander, the containment field is opening. On the view screen, Captain Chen nodded to someone off camera. Deploy the package. The human ship's hull began to separate along invisible seams. What Zethkri had taken for crude welding was actually sophisticated camouflage. The Dawn wasn't just one ship. It was a carefully disguised carrier. And from its depths, something emerged that made Zethkri's ichor run cold. It was sleek where their ship was angular. It was elegant where theirs was functional. And it was massive, easily twice the size of a hegemony dreadnought, yet it moved through space with the fluid grace of a living thing. Impossible, Zethkri whispered. Commander. Veltar's voice was barely controlled panic. I'm reading energy signatures I don't recognize. The power output, it's off our scales. The human captain was still smiling. Commander, allow me to introduce the UES Prometheus. She's our newest warship. We built her specifically for this meeting. That's impossible. Our intelligence networks monitor every species in the galaxy. Humans don't have the technology to... Oh, but we do, Captain Chen interrupted. You see, Commander, you made a critical error. Your intelligence networks only monitor known space. You never looked beyond your own borders. The Prometheus settled into position alongside the Dawn, dwarfing both vessels. Its hull seemed to absorb light, making it difficult to focus on directly. You see, Captain Chen continued, while you were busy conquering the galaxy, we were busy exploring it, all of it, including the regions you marked as uninhabitable or worthless. What are you saying? I'm saying we've been watching you for a very long time, Commander, studying you, learning from you, and occasionally finding things you missed. The Prometheus began to glow with an inner light that made Zethkri's visual sensors ache. Veltar, weapon status. Charging, Commander, but the readings from that ship, I don't think our weapons will be sufficient. Captain Chen shook her head sadly. We really did come in peace, Commander. We had hoped to establish diplomatic relations, to learn from each other, to find our place in the galactic community. Then, why the weapon ship? Because we're human, she said simply. And if there's one thing we've learned from studying your empire, it's that peace is only possible when backed by strength. The Prometheus was now fully powered, its hull pulsing, with energies that made space itself seem to bend around it. So here's our proposal, Commander. You return to your hegemony. You tell them that humanity wishes to open formal diplomatic channels, and in return, we won't have to demonstrate what this ship can actually do. Zethkri's mandibles clicked rapidly as he processed the situation. This was impossible. Humans were primitive. His scanners had confirmed it unless... Veltar, scan the Dawn again. Full spectrum. Already running, Commander. Reading identical energy signatures, the same shielding, the same power systems. Both ships? Commander? Veltar's voice was barely a whisper. The Dawn isn't a diplomatic vessel at all. It's a wolf in sheep's clothing. Its entire exterior is a facade. Underneath, it's just as advanced as the Prometheus. On the screen, Captain Chen nodded approvingly. Very good, Commander. You're beginning to understand. This is impossible. Humans are primitive. Our intelligence... Your intelligence sees what we want it to see, Captain Chen said. Do you really think a species that conquered its own solar system in less than a century would be naive about galactic politics? The truth hit Zethkri like a kinetic round to the thorax. The entire first contact scenario. It was staged. From the moment your long-range sensors detected us, yes. We wanted to see how the hegemony would react to what appeared to be a primitive species entering their territory. And you reacted exactly as we expected, with arrogance, contempt, and the immediate assumption of superiority. Captain Chen's expression hardened, just like you have with every other species you've encountered. Zethkri felt the ground of his worldview crumbling beneath him. How many ships do you have? Enough. How long have you been preparing for this? Since the day we detected your first transmission. How advanced are you really? Captain Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Advanced enough to know that the hegemony's reign is over, Commander. The question is whether it ends with negotiation or demonstration. And as the Prometheus powered up to full battle readiness, its hull beginning to phase in and out of visible reality, Zethkri realized with growing horror that everything he thought he knew about humans, about power, about the galaxy itself, was wrong, terrifyingly, catastrophically wrong. Chapter 2. The Revelation Commander Zethkri's neural interface flooded with emergency alerts as his sensor array tried to make sense of what it was detecting from the human ships. The readings were impossible. Energy signatures that shouldn't exist, materials that defied known physics, and weapon systems that made hegemony technology look like crude tools carved from stone. Commander? Veltar's voice cracked with barely controlled panic. I'm detecting massive energy buildups throughout both human vessels. Whatever they're powering up, it's drawing more energy than our entire fleet could generate. On the view screen, Captain Chen remained calm, almost serene. I can see you're having trouble processing this information, Commander. That's understandable. Most species do when they first encounter us properly. Most species? Zethkri's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among his kind. How many others have you contacted? Oh, we haven't contacted anyone else, Chen replied with that same unsettling smile. But we've been watching, learning. The hegemony is very thorough in its documentation, Commander. Every species you've conquered, every world you've enslaved, every civilization you've erased, all of it broadcast across your networks for administrative purposes. The implications hit Zethkri like a physical blow. You've been monitoring our communications? For over 200 of your standard years, Chen confirmed. Did you really think a species advanced enough to achieve interstellar travel wouldn't have developed sophisticated listening posts? We've heard every transmission, monitored every fleet movement, analyzed every tactical decision your empire has made. Impossible. Your encryption assumes a certain level of technological development. It's designed to keep out species at your level or below. Chen's voice took on an almost pitying tone. It wasn't designed to keep out species that have transcended your understanding of physics. Behind her, Zethkri could see other humans working at control stations that seemed to be made of pure light. Their movements were smooth, efficient, almost choreographed. These weren't the clumsy, primitive creatures his intelligence files described. "Veltar," he said quietly. "Contact the Fleet Command. Priority Alpha Alert." "I've been trying, Commander. Our communications are being jammed." "Jammed? By what?" "Unknown, sir. The interference pattern is unlike anything in our databases." "On the screen?" Captain Chen tilted her head slightly. "Your communications aren't jammed, Commander. They're being redirected. Every message you send is being received and analyzed by our systems. Your fleet command is getting carefully crafted. Responses that indicate all is well with your patrol." The casual way she said it, as if manipulating hegemony military communications was no more difficult than breathing, sent ice through Zethkri's veins. "What do you want?" he asked. "I told you. Diplomatic relations. An end to the hegemonies. Expansion. Peace." "Peace? You ambush a hegemony warship and call it peace?" "Commander," Chen said, her voice taking on a harder edge. "In the past standard hour, your empire has conquered 2 systems, enslaved the populations of 3 worlds, and completely eradicated a species that had the audacity to resist. That happened while we've been talking. We monitored every transmission." Zethkri said nothing. These were routine operations, barely worth noting in the daily reports. "So when you ask what we want," Chen continued, "understand that we've watched your empire commit genocide as casually as you might discuss the weather. The hegemony has made the galaxy a place of fear and suffering. We want that to end. And if we refuse?" Captain Chen was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded to someone off-screen. The Prometheus began to change. Its hull, which had been merely absorbing light, now began to phase in and out of normal space-time. Where it passed, reality itself seemed to bend and twist. "Veltar, what am I looking at?" I don't know, Commander. The ship appears to be existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. My sensors can't lock onto it." "It's called phase shift technology," Chen explained. "We developed it after studying the reports of your encounters with the Ethereal Collective. Remember them? The species that could step between dimensions? You hunted them to extinction because their ability to phase shift made them too dangerous to control," Zethkri remembered. The Ethereal Collective had been one of the most challenging species the hegemony had ever faced. It had taken decades and enormous resources to develop weapons that could target phased beings. "We found their homeworld," Chen said quietly. "After you finished with it. We studied their ruins, their technology, their art. We learned about their culture, their dreams, their children, and we improved upon their science." The Prometheus solidified again, but now it seemed somehow more real than the space around it, as if it were the only solid thing in a universe of shadows. "The ethereals could phase shift," Chen continued. "We can phase kill. We can reach into any dimension, any layer of reality, and eliminate targets that exist there. There is no defense against this technology because there is nowhere to hide from it." "You're bluffing," Chen smiled sadly. "Long-range sensors, Commander. Check your long-range sensors." Zethkri's crew scrambled to comply. The readings that came back made no sense at first. Then slowly the truth began to dawn. "The asteroid field in the Kethvar system," Veltar whispered. "It's gone." "Gone?" "Not destroyed, Commander. Gone. Erased, as if it never existed. The debris field that's been there for millennia, it's just not there anymore." Chen nodded. "We needed to test the phase kill weapon before this meeting. That asteroid field seemed like a good target. Completely uninhabited, no strategic value, but substantial enough to demonstrate the technology's effectiveness." "You erased an entire asteroid field from all dimensions simultaneously," Chen confirmed. "Every possible version of it, across all potential realities. It doesn't just not exist here and now. It never existed anywhere, at any time." The bridge of the Vexthalan was silent except for the emergency alarms that continued to wail. Zethkri felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries. Genuine fear. "How?" he asked. "The same way your empire has conquered the galaxy, Commander. Through superior technology and the will to use it. The difference is motivation. You conquer, because you can. We developed these weapons because we had to. Had to stop you. Chen touched a control panel, and suddenly the main screen split. Half still showed her bridge, but the other half displayed a tactical map of the galaxy. Zethkri recognized it. It was identical to the maps used by Hegemony Strategic Command. But as he watched, red dots began appearing throughout Hegemony space. Each of those dots represents a human ship, Commander. They've been in position for the past 6 months, waiting for this conversation to conclude. There were hundreds of them. Thousands. In every major system, around every strategic world, near every Hegemony fleet concentration. Your entire empire is currently surrounded, Chen said matter-of-factly. Every Hegemony world, every military installation, every fleet. All of them are within range of phase-kill weapons. This is impossible. Our sensors would have detected. Your sensors detect what we allow them to detect. We've been studying your technology for 2 centuries, Commander. We know its limitations better than you do. Zethkri stared at the tactical display. If it was accurate, if the humans really had positioned forces throughout Hegemony space, then the galaxy's greatest empire was already defeated. They just didn't know it yet. What are your terms? He asked quietly. Simple. Immediate cessation of all aggressive expansion, liberation of all enslaved populations, reparations to surviving members of exterminated species, and the establishment of a galactic council where all species have equal representation. The Hegemony will never agree to that. Then the Hegemony will cease to exist, Chen said simply. Not destroyed, Commander. Erased. Every Hegemony world, every ship, every trace of your civilization, removed from all possible realities. As if you never existed, you would commit genocide to prevent genocide? We would commit erasure to prevent genocide, Chen corrected. There's a difference. Genocide leaves survivors to remember the victims. Erasure leaves nothing at all. Zethkri found himself faced with an impossible choice. Accept terms that would mean the end of everything his civilization had built, or risk the complete annihilation of his species. I need to contact my superiors. Of course. But Commander? Chen's voice stopped him as he moved toward his communications station. Remember that we've been monitoring your networks for 2 centuries. We know who your superiors are. We know their personalities, their decision-making patterns, their fears. We know exactly how they'll respond to this situation. And we've prepared accordingly. The Prometheus is just the ship we wanted you to see. We have others, many others, and some of them are already at the coordinates your superiors will order the fleet to muster when they hear your report. The tactical display zoomed in on the Hegemony capital system. There, surrounding the homeworld itself, were more red dots, dozens of them. The choice is simple, Commander. Your empire ends today. The only question is whether your species survives to see tomorrow. And as Zethkri stared at the evidence of humanity's overwhelming superiority, he realized that everything he thought he knew about power, about conquest, about the natural order of the galaxy, had been turned upside down. The humans weren't the primitive species emerging into galactic politics. The Hegemony was. Chapter 3. The Price of Empire. The silence on the bridge of the Vexthallen stretched like a taut cable ready to snap. Commander Zethkri's crew stood frozen at their stations, staring at the tactical display showing thousands of human ships positioned throughout Hegemony space, like antibodies surrounding an infection. Commander, Veltar whispered, what are your orders? Zethkri looked at his science officer, a brilliant strategist who had helped plan dozens of successful conquests, and saw something in her compound eyes he'd never seen before. Helplessness. The mathematics of their situation were brutal and simple. Even if every reading was wrong, even if the humans were somehow bluffing about 90% of their capabilities, the Hegemony was still facing a force that outmatched them completely. How long? He asked Captain Chen. How long what, Commander? How long have you been planning this? Chen considered the question. Actively? About 50 of your standard years, but the decision was made much earlier than that. What decision? The decision that the Hegemony had to be stopped. On the tactical display, The red dots began to pulse in a slow, synchronized rhythm. It was hypnotic and terrifying, a visible heartbeat of humanity's presence throughout the galaxy. "You want to know when we truly understood what your empire was?" Chen asked. "It was the Cathara incident." Zethkri's mandibles clicked involuntarily. The Cathara incident was a classified operation from nearly a century ago. It wasn't in any public records. "How do you know about Cathara?" "We know about all of them, Commander. Every classified operation, every necessary genocide, every species you've erased from history. But Cathara was special, wasn't it?" Zethkri said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. "For those listening who might not know," Chen continued, addressing not just Zethkri but clearly his entire crew, "the Cathara were a peaceful species. Artists, philosophers, poets. They had no weapons, no military, no aggressive tendencies. Their only crime was living on a world rich in quantum crystals that the hegemony needed for its expansion. They were given the choice to relocate," Zethkri said quietly. "To a dead world with no resources and no ability to support their civilization," Chen replied, "which you knew they would refuse. You were counting on it." The accusation hung in the air like a toxin. Around the bridge, Zethkri could feel his crew's attention shifting, beginning to see their empire through alien eyes. "The Cathara refused relocation," Chen continued, "so the hegemony declared them a threat to galactic stability. You sent a full fleet to deal with a species that had never developed weapons beyond hunting tools." "Standard pacification protocol," Zethkri said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You bombarded their cities from orbit," Chen said, her voice taking on the cadence of someone reading from a report. "Population centers, cultural sites, schools, hospitals. When the orbital bombardment was complete, you deployed ground forces to eliminate survivors. The operation took 6 standard hours. How do you know these details?" "Because we found the survivors, Commander." The words hit Zethkri like a physical blow. "Impossible. There were no survivors. The reports confirmed what you wanted them to confirm. But space is vast, and the Cathara were accomplished stellar cartographers. A few dozen managed to escape in a converted observatory ship. They made it to the galactic rim, where they spent the next 60 years dying slowly from radiation poisoning. Because their ship wasn't designed for extended travel." Chen's voice remained steady, but something in her expression had hardened. "We found them by accident. Our deep space telescopes detected the ship's distinctive emissions. By the time we reached them, only 3 were still alive. An elderly historian, a young mother and her infant daughter." "What happened to them?" "The mother and child recovered. They're living on Earth now. The historian..." Chen paused. "The historian spent her last months teaching us about Catharan culture, their language, their art, their dreams. She made us promise that her people would be remembered." The tactical display shifted, showing not the positions of human ships, but images, artwork, architecture, music represented in visual form. It was beautiful and alien and utterly peaceful. "This is what you destroyed, Commander. Not just lives, but an entire way of seeing the universe. The Cathara could perceive electromagnetic spectra invisible to most species. Their art was based on patterns of light that existed in dimensions we're still learning to detect. When you killed them, you eliminated not just people but entire forms of beauty that will never exist again." Zethkri found himself staring at the Catharan art, seeing in it a kind of aesthetic achievement his own species had never imagined. It was haunting and perfect, and gone forever. "This is when we made the decision," Chen said. "Not just to defend ourselves when you found us, but to actively seek the end of your empire. Because we realized that left unchecked, the hegemony would eventually destroy everything worth preserving in the galaxy. And you think you're better than us?" Zethkri asked, though the question felt hollow even as he spoke it. "We think we're different from you," Chen replied. "The hegemony conquers because it can. Humanity fights because it must. There's a difference." "Is there? You're threatening to erase our entire civilization?" "Only if you refuse to change. The choice is still yours, Commander." Zethkri looked around his bridge. His crew, beings he had served with for decades, were staring at him with expressions he couldn't read. Were they waiting for orders, questioning his authority, or simply processing the revelation that everything they had believed about their civilization's righteousness was a lie? Feltar, he said quietly. Analysis. If we were to engage the human ships, what would be our probability of success? His science officer was silent for so long that Zethkri wondered if she had heard the question. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Commander, based on the demonstrated capabilities of just these two ships, our probability of success in a direct engagement is 0. 0? Less than 0, sir. We would be eliminated before we could fire a single shot. And that's assuming these are the only human ships in the area, which the tactical display suggests they are not. On the view screen, Captain Chen nodded sympathetically. Your science officer is correct, Commander. This isn't a negotiation backed by force. This is force offering you the option to negotiate. And if we choose not to, then you become another historical footnote. Another empire that grew too large and too cruel to sustain itself. The galaxy will remember the hegemony as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power. Or as the civilization that stood against tyranny, Zethkri said, though even he could hear the desperation in his voice. Commander, Chen said gently, do you know how many species have said those exact words as they faced the end of their empires? 17 that we know of from your own historical records. The galaxy is full of the ruins of civilizations that thought their cause justified their methods. The truth of it settled over Zethkri like a shroud. The hegemony had risen to power by conquering empire after empire, each one convinced of its own righteousness, each one certain that their version of order was what the galaxy needed. What happens to us? He asked. If we agree to your terms, what happens to the hegemony? You become what you were always meant to be, Chen replied. One species among many, contributing to galactic civilization instead of dominating it. Your technology, your knowledge, your perspectives, they have value, but not more value than anyone else's. Our people will never accept that. Then your people will be given the choice between accepting it and ceasing to exist. Not just death. Commander, complete erasure from all possible realities, no trace that you ever existed. The casual way she said it, as if erasing an entire species from existence was a simple administrative decision, sent a chill through Zethkri that had nothing to do with the temperature of his ship. You're asking us to surrender everything. We are. I'm asking you to become something better than what you are, Chen corrected. The hegemony has spent centuries conquering and destroying. What if you spent the next centuries creating and rebuilding? Creating what? A galaxy where species like the Cathera can exist and thrive, where art and beauty and diversity are valued over uniformity and control, where strength is measured not by how much you can destroy, but by how much you can preserve. Zethkri was quiet for a long moment, staring at the images of Kitharan art still displayed on his screen. It occurred to him that in all his centuries of service, he had never seen anything so beautiful created by his own people. The hegemony built ships and weapons and monuments to its own power. But when had they last created something purely because it was beautiful? I need to contact my superiors, he said finally. Of course. But Commander? Chen's voice stopped him again. Remember that they'll be making this decision not just for your species, but for every species you've conquered. The hegemony has enslaved hundreds of worlds. Your choice today determines whether those people live free or die with you. And as Zethkri prepared to deliver the most important message in his civilization's history, he realized that humanity had done something no enemy had ever managed. They had made him question whether the hegemony deserved to survive. The answer, he was beginning to suspect, was more complex than he had ever imagined. Chapter 4. The Weight of Worlds High. Admiral Kexmoth of the Hegemony Supreme Command received Commander Zethkri's transmission in the secure chamber deep beneath the capital city of Nexus Prime. As the most powerful military leader in known space, Kexmoth had overseen the conquest of 3 galactic spiral arms and the subjugation of over 400 species. Nothing in his 2-century career had prepared him for what he was hearing. "Repeat that last section," he ordered, his 6-meter frame looming over the holographic display showing Zethkri's distant ship. "High Admiral, the humans have positioned advanced warships throughout hegemony space. Their technology appears to exceed our own by several orders of magnitude. They are demanding immediate cessation of all expansion, the liberation of conquered worlds, and the establishment of some form of galactic council." Kexmoth's massive claws clicked against the metal floor, a sound that had preceded the extinction of more species than he could count. "And you believe this display of force is genuine?" "Sir, they demonstrated a weapon that erased the Kethvar asteroid field from existence. Not destroyed, erased. Our sensors confirm the field is simply gone, as if it never existed. Impossible. No known technology. With respect, High Admiral, that's the point. This is unknown technology, far beyond our current understanding." Kexmoth studied the tactical display his aide had compiled from Zethkri's reports. If accurate, it showed the hegemony completely surrounded, every major world and fleet concentration under threat from weapons that could apparently strike without warning across dimensional barriers. "Analysis," he barked at his strategic command staff. General Thexkor, his chief strategist, stepped forward. "High Admiral, if even half of these reports are accurate, we are facing a force capable of destroying our entire civilization within hours. The tactical situation is unprecedented. Recommendations? Sir, I recommend immediate mobilization of all fleets. If we're going to face this threat, we need to concentrate our forces and what?" Kexmoth's voice cut through the room like a blade. "You just heard that they can erase matter from existence across multiple dimensions. What good would our fleets do against technology like that?" The silence that followed was profound. For the first time in hegemony history, their military leadership was faced with an enemy they couldn't simply overwhelm with superior numbers and conventional tactics. "Perhaps," suggested Science Director Yilneth, "we should consider their terms." The room erupted. Voices rose in anger, mandibles clicked in outrage, and several officers reached for weapons before Kexmoth's roar brought order. "Silence." When the chamber quieted, Kexmoth turned to the Science Director. "Explain." "High Admiral, the hegemony has always been practical above all else. We conquer because conquest serves our interests. We expand because expansion makes us stronger. But what if we've encountered a force that makes expansion impossible and conquest counterproductive? You're suggesting surrender. I'm suggesting adaptation. If these humans possess technology that exceeds our own, perhaps there's more to be gained by studying them than by fighting them." "The hegemony does not negotiate with inferior species," General Thexkor snarled. "Are they inferior?" Yilneth asked quietly, "Because from where I'm standing, they appear to have achieved technological superiority while we weren't even aware of their existence." The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The fundamental assumption underlying their entire civilization, that the hegemony represented the pinnacle of galactic evolution, was being challenged by the evidence of human capabilities. "Sir," Commander Zethkri's voice crackled through the communication link, "the human captain is requesting a response to their terms. They've given us 1 standard hour to decide." 1 hour? Kexmoth's rage was building. They dare to give the hegemony an ultimatum? "High Admiral," Zethkri's voice carried a strange tone, something that might have been respect or fear or both. "I've been monitoring their communications. They're not bluffing. The energy readings from their ships. Sir, just one of their vessels could sterilize our homeworld." Kexmoth moved to the massive tactical display that dominated the center of the chamber. It showed the hegemony in all its glory. Thousands of worlds, millions of ships, the greatest empire in galactic history. And now, apparently, all of it at the mercy of a species they had dismissed as primitive. "Show me everything we know about humans," he ordered. The display shifted, showing a small blue world on the galaxy's rim. Data was sparse, a young species, barely a few thousand years of recorded history, recent development of space travel. Nothing that suggested they should be capable of challenging the hegemony. "Where did we go wrong?" he muttered. Perhaps, Yilneth suggested, we never went wrong. Perhaps we simply encountered something we never expected to encounter. Which is? A species that developed differently than we did. While we were conquering the galaxy, they were exploring it. While we were perfecting the art of war, they were perfecting the science of survival. General Thexcor bristled. The hegemony has survived for millennia. By conquering everything around us, Yilneth replied. But what happens when you encounter something that can't be conquered? Something that's been preparing specifically to face conquerors? The implications were staggering. If the humans had indeed been studying the hegemony for centuries, learning their tactics, their technology, their weaknesses, then this confrontation wasn't a first contact scenario at all. It was the culmination of a long-term strategic plan. Sir, an aide interrupted, we're receiving reports from fleet commanders throughout the Empire. They're detecting energy signatures consistent with the readings from Commander Zethkri's encounter. The human ships they're everywhere. Kexmoth felt something he hadn't experienced in decades, genuine uncertainty. The hegemony had always won through superior force and better strategy. But what did you do when faced with an enemy that had already outmaneuvered you before you even knew you were in a game? Open a channel to the human ship, he ordered. Sir, if they want to negotiate, then we'll negotiate. But on our terms. The main display flickered, showing the bridge of the human vessel. Captain Chen appeared along with her crew. But something was different now. There were other figures visible in the background. Figures that weren't human. High Admiral Kexmoth, Chen said, her voice carrying easily across the vast distance. I'm honored to speak with you directly. You have demanded terms that no civilization has ever dared present to the hegemony. Kexmoth replied, his voice carrying the authority of absolute power. Do you understand the magnitude of what you're asking? I understand perfectly, Chen said. I'm asking you to stop committing genocide. We are bringing order to a chaotic galaxy. You are bringing death to a living galaxy, one of the background figures said, stepping forward. Kexmoth's breath caught. The speaker was Kitharin, one of the supposedly extinct artistic species the hegemony had eliminated nearly a century ago. Her distinctive crystalline skin patterns were unmistakable. Impossible, he whispered. High Admiral, the Kitharin said, her voice carrying harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't produce. My name is Silandra. I am the daughter of the last Kitharin historian, and I speak for the dead of my people. More figures stepped forward. Kexmoth recognized some of them, species the hegemony had conquered, enslaved, or eliminated. They were all there, standing behind the human captain like living accusations. How? Was all he could manage. We saved who we could, Chen explained. Every species the hegemony targeted, we tried to reach first. We couldn't save them all, but we saved enough to preserve their cultures, their knowledge, their right to exist. The galaxy has room for everyone, High Admiral, Silandra added. Everyone except those who would deny that room to others. Kexmoth stared at the assembled representatives of civilizations he had personally ordered destroyed. They should have been dead, forgotten, erased from history. Instead, they were here, backed by technology that could erase his empire from existence. What you're asking, he said slowly, would mean the end of everything we've built. What you've built, said another figure, a member of the aquatic depthmore species, is a monument to your own cruelty. Let it end. Let something better take its place. The hegemony has brought stability to the galaxy. The hegemony has brought silence to the galaxy, corrected a third figure, one of the energy-based Lumari. Silence through extinction. That is not stability. It is death. Chen stepped forward again. High Admiral, I want you to understand something. This isn't revenge. If this were about revenge, we would have simply erased your empire without warning, the way you've erased so many others. This is about justice, about giving you the choice you never gave them. And if we refuse, then you become another extinct species, another footnote in galactic history, another cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition. Kexmoth looked around his command chamber, his officers, his strategists, his most trusted advisors. All of them were staring at the display with expressions of growing horror. The weight of their civilization's crimes was finally becoming clear. How long do we have to decide? You have 43 minutes remaining, Chen replied. But High Admiral, I want you to consider something. Right now, in this moment, you have the power to end the cycle of violence that has defined galactic history for millennia. You can choose to be remembered as the leader who brought peace to the galaxy, not through conquest but through wisdom. Or you can choose to be remembered as the last leader of the last conquering empire. The choice is yours. The channel closed, leaving Kexmoth alone with his thoughts and the weight of an impossible decision. Around him, his staff waited, in silence, each of them grappling with the realization that their entire worldview had been shattered in the span of a single conversation. The hegemony's reign was over. The only question was whether their species would survive to see what came next. Epilogue: The New Dawn. 1 standard year. Later. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Galactic Council station, watching as ships from dozens of species arrived for the quarterly assembly. The station orbited a neutral star system, far from any single species' territory, symbolizing the new era of cooperation that had emerged from the ashes of the hegemony. It hadn't been easy. The transition from empire to council had required careful negotiation, extensive reconstruction, and more than a few tense moments when old guard hegemony forces had attempted to resist the changes. But gradually, slowly, the galaxy had begun to transform. Remarkable, isn't it? Chen turned to see Silandra approaching, her crystalline skin reflecting the light of distant stars in patterns that would have been impossible to see without the enhanced visual systems humans had developed. The Catharan had become one of the most effective ambassadors in the new galactic order, her people's aesthetic philosophy bringing beauty and harmony to diplomatic proceedings that had once been dominated by force and intimidation. What's remarkable is that it's working, Chen replied. I wasn't sure it would. Through the viewport they could see the Vexthalan, now serving as a research vessel rather than a warship. Commander Zethkri had adapted to the new reality with surprising grace, leading joint scientific expeditions to explore the galaxy's uncharted regions. His crew, once warriors, had become explorers and researchers. The former High Admiral still struggles with the transition, Silandra observed. Chen nodded. Kexmoth had been the most difficult to convince, clinging to the old ways even as his empire crumbled around him. But even he had eventually accepted the new reality, though his role in the Galactic Council remained largely ceremonial. Change is never easy for those who benefited from the old system, Chen said. But the younger generation is adapting quickly. It was true. Hegemony youth, raised on stories of conquest and domination, were embracing the new paradigm of cooperation and mutual respect. Universities throughout former hegemony space were filled with students studying alien cultures, learning extinct languages, and working to restore what their ancestors had destroyed. The restoration projects are proceeding ahead of schedule, Silandra reported. The Catharan homeworld should be habitable again within 5 years. Chen smiled. The massive terraforming project was one of dozens underway throughout the galaxy, using advanced human technology to restore worlds damaged by hegemony expansion. It was painstaking work, but it served an important symbolic purpose, showing that destruction could be undone, that mistakes could be corrected. Any word from the deep space expeditions? 3 new species contacted this month, Silandra replied. All of them expressed interest in joining the council. The galaxy is larger and more diverse than any of us imagined. Chen nodded. With the hegemony no longer aggressively expanding, hundreds of species that had hidden on the galactic rim were emerging, eager to participate in the new cooperative galactic civilization. Each brought unique perspectives, technologies, and cultural contributions. Captain, a familiar voice called from behind them. Chen turned to see Commander Zethkri approaching, his massive form moving with the careful precision she had come to associate with reformed hegemony officers. The transition hadn't been easy for any of them, but Zethkri had embraced his new role with something approaching enthusiasm. "Commander," she acknowledged, "how did the archaeological expedition go?" "Fascinating," he replied, and Chen was struck by how different he sounded from the arrogant military officer she had first encountered. "We found evidence of at least 12 previously unknown civilizations in the Outer Rim. All of them apparently fled hegemony expansion at various points in history. Survivors? Unknown. But the cultural artifacts suggest sophisticated societies with advanced technology. If any of them are still out there, they might be willing to make contact now that the political situation has stabilized." It was a pattern they had seen repeated throughout the galaxy. The hegemony's aggressive expansion had driven countless species into hiding, exile, or extinction. Now, with the threat removed, some were beginning to emerge from the shadows. "There's something else," Zethkri continued. "We found records suggesting that humans weren't the first species to develop effective countermeasures against hegemony technology. There may have been others who were preparing to act." Chen raised an eyebrow. "Others?" "The evidence is fragmentary, but it appears that several species had formed a loose alliance to study hegemony tactics and develop countermeasures. The alliance fell apart when most of its members were conquered or eliminated, but the research survived." "Meaning?" "Meaning that humanity's rise to galactic prominence wasn't just about superior technology or better strategy. It was about being in the right place at the right time, with the right combination of resources and determination to complete work that others had started." Chen considered this. It made sense. The galaxy was vast and ancient, full of species with millennia of accumulated knowledge. The idea that humans had developed their advanced technology in isolation was always somewhat implausible. "So we were part of a larger pattern," she mused. "The galaxy's immune response to the hegemony's expansion." "Perhaps," Zethkri agreed. "But if so, it worked. The hegemony is no longer a threat, and the galaxy is free to develop in new directions." Through the viewport, they watched as a massive cargo ship, one of the new joint species designs, docked with the station. Its holds would be full of cultural artifacts, scientific data, and trade goods from dozens of worlds. The galaxy was becoming connected in ways that the hegemony's forced unity had never achieved. "Captain Chen," Silandra said softly, "there's one more thing. The memorial project has been approved by the full council." Chen felt a chill of reverence. The memorial project was perhaps the most ambitious undertaking of the new galactic order. An attempt to catalog and remember every species, every culture, every individual life that had been lost to hegemony expansion. It would take decades to complete, but when finished, it would ensure that the victims of the old empire were never forgotten. "Every name," Chen said quietly. "Every culture, every work of art, every song, every story that was lost. Everyone we can recover," Silandra confirmed. "And those we cannot recover will be honored with spaces left deliberately empty, representing all that was lost to us forever." It was a powerful symbol. The empty spaces in the memorial representing not just individual losses, but the infinite potential that had been destroyed by the hegemony's hunger for conquest. "The galaxy is healing," Chen observed, watching as ships from a dozen different species worked together to unload the cargo vessel. "Slowly," Zethkri agreed, "but it is healing." As they stood there, representatives of 3 species that had once been enemies, Chen reflected on how much had changed in just 1 year. The galaxy that had been dominated by fear and conquest was becoming something new, a place where diversity was celebrated, where cooperation replaced domination, where the vast reaches of space offered infinite opportunities for discovery and growth. It wasn't perfect. There were still conflicts, still problems to solve, still species that struggled to adapt to the new reality. But for the first time in galactic history, those problems were being addressed through dialogue and cooperation rather than force and intimidation. "Captain," Silandra said, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if the hegemony had chosen differently? If they had embraced cooperation from the beginning instead of conquest? Chen considered the question. I think about it sometimes, but I've come to believe that everything happened the way it needed to happen. The hegemony's brutality was what united the rest of us. Their cruelty was what motivated us to develop the technology to stop them. In a strange way, they created the very force that would eventually replace them. The old gods create their own destroyers, Zethkri murmured, quoting an ancient hegemony proverb. Perhaps, Chen agreed. But in this case, the destroyers chose to be builders instead. As if summoned by their conversation, a new ship appeared in the distance, sleek, elegant, unlike anything any of them had seen before. As they watched, it approached the station with obvious caution. New contact, Chen observed. Should we be concerned? Zethkri asked. Chen smiled, remembering her own first encounter with hegemony forces. No, we should be excited. Every new species we meet, every new culture we encounter, makes the galaxy a richer place. The ship docked with the station, and Chen could see figures moving through its transparent sections. They were unlike any species in the current Galactic database, tall, graceful beings that seemed to move through their ship's corridors like liquid light. Another mystery to solve, Silandra said with obvious pleasure. Another story to learn, another perspective to understand. Chen nodded. This was what the galaxy could be, not a place of conquest and domination, but a place of infinite discovery and endless possibility. A place where differences were celebrated rather than eliminated, where strength was measured not by what you could destroy, but by what you could create and preserve. As the three of them watched the newest arrivals prepare to make contact with the galactic community, Chen reflected on the words she had spoken to Commander Zethkri a year ago. Advanced enough to know that the hegemony's reign is over. She had been right, but what she hadn't anticipated was what would take the hegemony's place. Not another empire, not another form of domination, but something entirely new. A galactic civilization based on cooperation, mutual respect, and the radical idea that the universe was vast enough for everyone. The age of conquest was over. The age of exploration had begun. And somewhere in the vast reaches of space on worlds they had yet to discover, among species they had yet to meet, the next chapter of galactic history was already being written. End.